G'day guys, welcome to this video series where we're going to break down everything that you need to know to master each and every detachment in the Chaos Space Marine Codex. We're going to break down the detachment rules in detail, go through what they do, and give each one a rating of 0 to 10. We're going to break down every enhancement available to each detachment. We're going to talk about which ones are worth the points, which ones you're going to want to leave behind, and we're going to give each of them a rating of 0 to 3. We're then going to break down all of the stratagems, some of the amazing power, which ones are worth the command points and which ones are not, and we're going to give each one of those stratagems a rating of 0 to 3 as well. We're then going to talk about which data sheets pair best with the stratagems, enhancements, and detachment abilities to create some truly brutal combos on the tabletop, and we're going to give them a further rating of 0 to 10. Once that's done, we're going to have an overall power rating for the detachment of 0 to 50 based on the above points. This is going to give you a real indication of how powerful this detachment is. Then we're going to include an example list that includes all of the powerful combos that we've talked about earlier. We're going to give some practical examples of how to deploy that list and how to engage with the terrain and your opponent in various mission formats. And finally, we're going to place that detachment on the detachment leaderboard. We're going to give it a tier rating and we're going to place it in contrast to the other detachments to help you decide which detachment you want to field when you're running your Chaos Space Marines. So with that being said, let's get stuck into the video.
Look for the Blood God.
Alrighty guys, today we're going to be talking about the Pactbound Zealots. Now this is the same detachment as from the Index, so we're very familiar with this. However, there have been some slight changes to it, and I think it's worth going over this again in light of the new changes to the data sheets, etc. within the book to reassess it and also set a bit of a baseline for our expectations for the other detachments. So let's get stuck straight into it. The detachment rule for this one, we're all familiar with it. It's the Marks of Chaos, where basically instead of getting sustained hits or lethal hits on a 6+, you're going to get those critical hits on a 5+, depending on your Mark of Chaos. So for example, if you take the Mark of Khorne, you're going to be getting 5+ lethal hits in melee. If you take the Mark of Nurgle, you're going to get 5+ sustained hits in shooting. So there's a little bit of flexibility there, and this historically has always been considered one of the strongest detachment rules because it allows you to get sustained hits or lethal hits at your will on a 5+, which can really dial up the damage. So this is absolutely fantastic. I give this one a 7 out of 10 points. So it's really, really versatile. It's always going to provide you with that additional value. It's reliable, it's consistent, and it's powerful. But that's the detachment rule. Let's have a look at the enhancements because there's some pretty interesting stuff in here. So first up, we have the Talisman of Burning Blood. It's only 15 points. Heretic Studies model. It has to be a Khorne model, and you basically get to add 1 to the strength and attacks characteristic of the bearer's melee weapons. And if you make a Dark Pact and that Dark Pact does not fail, you can then add D3 instead. So this is going to take one of your characters and dial the damage output up on them fantastic. And it also has some really interesting combos, which we'll talk about later in this video. But yeah, this one's absolutely fantastic. I give this one a 2 out of 3. Now we're going to move on to the Eye of Tzeentch. This is a Heretic Studies model only for 15 points. Each time the bearer's unit makes a Dark Pact and does not fail the leadership test, if the result of that Dark Pact was an 8 or more, you gain 1 CP. This one, again, I'm going to give it a 2 out of 3. If you are running this detachment, there's a lot of really, really powerful stratagems. So being able to regenerate command points is very, very good. It's going to be very challenging to figure out who takes this relic. So essentially, for 15 points, even if it only nets you 1 command point throughout the course of the game, it's paid itself off because command points are such an absolute premium in this that I think it's definitely worth considering. Then we have the Orbs of Unlife. This is 15-point Nurgle enhancement. Basically, at the end of the fight phase, roll 1d6 for every model within 3 inches, every enemy unit within 3 inches, sorry. And add 1 to the result if you made a Dark Pact and did not fail the resulting leadership test. And on a 4+, that enemy unit suffers D3 mortal wounds. So this is really, really good. It allows you to basically get into the middle of your opponent's lines and essentially, at the end of the fight phase, do an explosion. It's going to do mortal wounds to a whole bunch of stuff. That's really quite powerful. I'm a big fan of this. Again, another 2 out of 3. So it's going to be very hard to discern which ones of these you want to take because they're all about equally as good as each other. And last but not least, we have the Intoxicating Elixir. This one is also 15 points. It's a Slaneshi model only, and the bearer has a 5+ Feel No Pain ability. And each time the bearer shoots or fights, if the bearer made a Dark Pact this phase and did not fail the resulting leadership test, after the bearer has resolved those attacks, select one enemy unit that was hit by one of those attacks, and that enemy unit has to take a Battle Shock test. This is pretty interesting in the way that you can do this to basically cause your opponent to fail those Battle Shock tests, which is going to prevent them from being able to do certain stratagems and certain combos. It's quite interesting. And it's also when you shoot or fight. So you could basically put this on like a Terminator Sorcerer, drop him in, shoot something, force them to take a Battle Shock, and now in their, when you go to charge them, they can't overwatch you. When you go to, get in combats with them, they can't use interrupts, they can't use negative damage, they can't use Feel No Pains or whatever stratagems they have. So there's really interesting stuff there. However, this one, it does require you not failing the Dark Pact. It also forces them to fail a Battle Shock test, so it's not super reliable. And for that reason alone, I'm going to give this one a 1 out of 3. Alright, now let's have a look at the stratagems. There's some really powerful stratagems in this detachment, so let's get stuck straight into them. So the first one is 1 CP, and this is called Eye of the Gods. Now this one is new, this one wasn't in the index detachment, and basically this is just after an enemy Heretic Astartes character from your unit, excluding Damned and Epic Heroes, etc., destroys an enemy unit. One Heretic Astartes character model in that unit. Until the end of the battle, add one to the move, toughness, wounds characteristics of the character, and one to the attacks, strength, and damage characteristic of melee weapons equipped by that model. So basically, you send in a unit, and after you kill something, one of your characters within that unit goes absolutely bonkers. It's also worth noting that this is when a character unit from your army kills something. So if you've got, say you've got a Chaos Lord attached to some Legionaries, and you charge, I don't know, a Dread Knight, and you fight with the Lord first, and you don't quite kill the Dread Knight, and then the Legionaries finish it off, well, because that character unit just destroyed a unit, you can spend the stratagem and you can buff up that Chaos Lord, even though he wasn't the one to deliver the final blow. And it's also worth noting, if you have multiple characters, say you have a Master of Executions and a Chaos Lord in the same unit, and they kill something, when you do this, you can select one of the characters within that unit to be the recipient of this buff. So this is really, really good. It's I'm going to give it a 2 out of 3. I think it's got plenty of play. It's not something that you'll use every game, but those games where you're able to go in, do some damage, and then do it in such a way where your Chaos Lord or your character is somewhat protected, then your opponent's not going to kill him, and then you're going to be able to come out and do all of this damage. Really, really spicy. And being able to increase the damage characteristics of those melee weapons means that you're able to get a 4 damage Thunderhammer, which is pretty crazy. The next stratagem is Eternal Hate, 1 CP. You'll be familiar with this one. Basically, in the fight phase, just after a unit has selected its targets, one Heretic Astartes unit from your army that was selected as one or more of the targets until the end of the phase. Each time a model in your army is destroyed, if that model has not fought this phase, roll a d6, and on adding 1 to the result of its Khorne model, and on a 4+, do not remove it from play. Instead, fight with it as if it was the fight phase. Then remove it from play. So basically, 1 CP, fights on death, on a 4-up or a 3-up if you're Khorne. This is really, really powerful. It's a really good deterrent, especially if you have a large unit of something that's Khorne that your opponent's going to be really hesitant to fight, because if they charge you and you use this stratagem, yeah, they might kill your unit, but whatever they sent in is probably going to die as well. So that's really, really powerful. I'm a big fan of that. That's going to get a 2 out of 3 from me as well. Next, we have Profane Zeal, 1 CP, and you're shooting a fight phase. One Heretic Astartes Chaos Undivided unit from your army that's not been selected to shoot or fight yet this phase. Until the end of the phase, each time a model in that unit makes an attack, reroll the wound roll. So 1 CP for reroll wounds. It is limited to Undivided, but we'll talk about how this combos with some really interesting stuff later in the video. But needless to say, this one's very, very powerful as well. Due to the fact that it's limited to Undivided, I'm only going to give it a 2 out of 3. If it was a little bit more broad, it would definitely be getting that 3 out of 3. Very powerful stratagem. Skin Shift, so this is 1 CP, 1 Heretic Astartes unit from your army. It regains up to 3 lost wounds, which is really, really good. And if it's a Tzeentch unit and it's below starting strength, you return 1 destroyed model to the unit with its full wounds remaining. So this one, being able to regenerate models is really, really powerful. It lets you do things like extend the distance of your unit, because basically if they kill one model, you take a model from the back, then you move the unit forward and you resurrect it, and then you put that guy in front of the unit, gaining an extra few inches worth of movement. So it's really good in that regard for your Zeech units. And also just being able to regenerate wounds. There'll be some situations where you might be, a vehicle that's gone below its bracket and you're now neg 1 to hit. So being able to spend 1 CP to get above that bracket, so you're back to hitting on, your normal ballistic skill, and you got some free wounds out of it, is also very good. That's another 2 out of 3 for me. Next we have Torpifying Refrain. So this is 1 CP in your movement phase. Select 1 Heretic Astartes model from your army. Until the end of your turn, it's eligible to declare a charge in a turn in which it fell back. And if it's a Slaanesh unit, it's able to shoot and declare a charge in a turn in which it advanced or fell back. So this one's really powerful, particularly on your Warp Talons, which are going to want to be Slaanesh. We'll talk about those in a moment, but basically now you're getting sustained hits, which is really good because you're also getting reroll wounds. So you go sustained hits on 5+, and then you're rerolling all of the wounds on all of those extra attacks is really, really good for Warp Talons. And then on top of that, you're now having the ability to advance and charge, which makes those Warp Talons way scarier than they otherwise would be. So that's the main use I see for this, but it's also really good on a whole host of different units. And then last, we have Festering Miasma in your opponent's shooting phase just after they've selected their targets. You basically use this on 1 unit in your army until the end of the phase. You gain stealth, so you're applying a -1 to hit on your opponent. And if you're a Nurgle unit, then you can only be selected as a target of an attack if the attacking model is within 18 inches of you. So it's kind of like creating a lone op, but you're also -1 to hit, so really, really powerful. I think this is one of those things where even just being able to put the -1 to hit on your units is going to make them significantly tougher, but it's really, really good on the long-ranged vehicles and things like that that are staying outside of 18 inches of your opponent, being able to just go, cool, I'm going to move my Predator out, I'm going to shoot you, and then you are so far away that you actually just can't engage with that Predator, is very, very powerful. So, again, given the limitations on it being Nurgle only getting their lone op part, I'm going to give this another 2 out of 3. So a really, really strong base of stratagems. None of these stratagems are particularly broken or game-changing, but none of them are unplayably bad either. Every one of them is good value for that 1 command point. So I definitely think the stratagems available to this detachment are really, really fantastic. Alright, so the first combo that I want to talk about for this detachment is what I call the Slaughter-nators, and basically this is just a Chaos Terminator unit, and you'll notice that it has the Despoiler's ability, which basically allows it to, when it makes a Dark Pack, until the end of the phase, it gets to reroll the hit rolls. So what you can do with these guys is you can use them as undivided. Now you're getting reroll hits with sustained hits or lethal hits, and then you're also going to get reroll wounds from the 1 CP Profane Seal stratagem. So you've basically got these units that are hyper efficient because they're going in with reroll hits, reroll wounds, sustained hits, or lethal hits depending on your target. They're a real Swiss Army knife of a unit. They're tough, they've got good damage, they're very reliable, and they're relatively inexpensive with the current points costs. So that's the Slaughter-nators. I think they're fantastic. The next combo we have is a really, really interesting Smash Lord. So basically you take a Chaos Lord, you give him a Thunder Hammer, you give him the Talisman of Burning Blood, you put him in a unit of Legionaries, and you put a Master of Executions in the unit as well. And now basically that unit, granted, quite expensive, but it's going to go in with reroll hits from the Master of Executions, provided the target has taken any damage. It's going to get reroll wounds from the Legionaries, and this Chaos Lord is going to go in with a phenomenal amount of attacks. Depending on your rolls, this guy's going to be able to go in with up to 10 attacks that are Strength 13, AP 3, 4 damage with reroll hits, reroll wounds, devastating wounds, and probably sustained hits as well, which is probably what you're going to want to take on this guy. This unit is absolutely brutal. It's also worth noting that because this guy is a Khorne character, he's going to be attached to a Khorne unit, that unit has the capacity to fight on death. So even if you full send him in, you annihilate something, you spend a CP to get the additional buffs from that stratagem, and then if your opponent sends in to try to kill you on another CP, you're going to be able to fight on death, and you're very likely to kill the thing that just charged you. So this is one unit, it's relatively expensive, but it has the very high probability of trading for multiple things in your opponent's army. It's very effective. And then the other one, which we touched on before, I call it the Talons of Excess, and basically it's just Warp Talons with the Mark of Slaanesh. Now, Warp Talons are one of the most broken units in this codex, and they're also one of the most broken units in the game by a lot of people's standards. Their ability to fight something and then fall back is absolutely fantastic, And these guys in this detachment are able to do it better than anybody else because A, they can advance and charge, which means if you do rapid ingress them, they're going to be able to dig deep into your opponent, or if you deploy them somewhere out of line of sight from that position, they're going to be able to threaten a lot of areas of the board, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But also, they're going in with sustained hits on a 5+. So when you're hitting on a 3, that means chances are, if you rolled 6 attacks, you'd roll a 1 and a 2, which would miss, but you'd roll a 5 and a 6, which would create an additional hit. So it kind of gives these guys 100% accuracy when they go in, which is absolutely fantastic. It dials the damage of these guys up and really increases the probability of you killing the target and then being able to pull off that amazing Warp Talon trick of disappearing after you fight. So absolutely fantastic damage output on the Warp Talons in this detachment specifically. So with all of those combos considered, I'm going to give this detachment an additional 6 out of 10 discretionary points for the various detachment combos that we've got here, which gives it a total of 32 out of 50, which is right at that baseline. So I think anything above this is going to be considered very, very powerful. Anything below this is going to be considered underpowered, and this gives us a very solid baseline of power for what you can expect out of a Chaos Space Marine army. Alrighty, so let's have a look at an example list that I've put together for the Pactbound Zealots. Now, like I've said in every other video in this series so far, it's worth noting that this has been designed around the theme of the detachment and also about being powerful. So I'm trying to thread both of those needles at the same time, which is quite challenging. So by all means, take this as a starting point and then modify it to your flavor. If you want to make it more thematic and more flavorful, you can head in that direction. If you want to make it more powerful, you can take more of the top meta style units. But this is a really good baseline, and it also illustrates and demonstrates some of the combos that we've discussed before. So we're going to start with a Chaos Lord, and we're giving him the Talisman of Burning Blood, and he's going to be Mark of Khorne so that he can join the Legionaries. Then we're going to have 2 Chaos Lords in Terminator armor, and both of those are going to be undivided with no enhancements. And then finally, we're going to have a Master of Executions. He's going to be Mark of Khorne as well, so we can join that Chaos Lord with the Legionaries, and he's going to have no enhancements either. Then we're going to have a Cultist Mob there for sticking your home objective and making sure that you can push forward with all of your forces without having to worry too much about controlling that objective. And we're going to have a big unit of 10 Legionaries with the Mark of Khorne. This is obviously going to have your characters attached to it. And then we're going to have a Rhino that has Mark of Khorne, so that those Legionaries, the characters, they can all fit inside that Rhino and threaten across the table. We're going to have a unit of Chaos Bikers here with Mark of Nurgle. Now, the reason for the Chaos Bikers is I think they're a relatively cheap and quite powerful unit. They're tough, they put out decent shooting, and we've made them Mark of Nurgle so that they can go out, they can shoot with their melter guns and get those sustained hits on a 5+. And then also, if they're on a flank, if they're on an objective somewhere and your opponent tries to shoot them from outside of 18, you're going to be able to spend a CP to keep those bikes alive, which is fantastic. Then this is where it gets a little bit interesting. We've got 2 big units of 10 Terminators. Now, like I said, these are going to have the Chaos Lords attached to them. And then the idea here is these units are just ridiculously efficient. Even if your opponent kills you down to only having a handful of Terminators left from each unit, that handful of Terminators is going to punch above their weight, and they're going to do serious damage because you're going to be able to get reroll hits and wounds. You've got the Chaos Lords in there, so you can get that stratagem for free, and you can get it in multiple places. Very, very powerful units, very tough units, and they're going to be an absolutely reliable sort of anchor point for the list. We then round the list out with some Raptors. They're there for objective play, controlling objectives, taking your opponent off of objectives, doing your secondaries like your, behind enemy lines or engage on all fronts, those sorts of things. And we've got 2 big units of Warp Talons, both with the Mark of Slaanesh, so that they can most effectively use that ability to charge things, fight, and then disappear back into Deep Strike. So the idea with this list is probably that you're going to deploy one of those Terminators on the board. You're probably going to deploy the other one in Deep Strike so you can rapid ingress it, and then depending on what your opponent does, you're either going to rapid ingress Terminators or Warp Talons, or play it back and forth and see which ones you want to go with depending on the situation. So that's the general idea of the list. Let's jump over now and have a look at deployment and have a talk about some of the different options available. Alrighty guys, so for the purpose of this video, I've got a few different deployment types here. It's worth considering at this point that there are a million different types of tournaments that have all kinds of different terrain layouts, and then there's also different missions and different deployment types. So any advice that I give here is going to be quite general, but I will try to make sure that the points will apply as broadly as possible. So we've got quite a few bits and pieces here. I've laid out some little circles here to give you guys a little bit of an understanding of sort of the idea of what we're going for. So let's clear the, let's say that the green is your opponent's army down here, and you're the red army up here. And let's say your opponent has deployed something like this. You know, they've deployed as much as they can outside of your line of sight. They probably won't put their 10 Marines exposed like that, so they might have these guys back here. You know, back in here somewhere. And they've basically deployed as much as they can outside of your line of sight. So you don't have a Mauler Fiend, so we'll get rid of that. You don't have any Venom Crawlers, so we'll get rid of... Where's the red Venom Crawler? So basically what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to do something like this, where you're going to take your Rhino and you're going to want to deploy it as close as you can whilst being outside of line of sight of your opponent. Because the last thing you want is for them to blow up your Rhino early in the game and hurt that Chaos Lord's ability. So you're probably going to put it over here somewhere where it's up hidden. And this way, if your opponent heads up this direction, they can't hit your Rhino. If they head around this direction, can't hit your Rhino. So somewhere like that is a pretty good staging place for your Rhino. Another spot is over here. And another spot might be in the middle here if your opponent's shooting isn't going to be threatening you, because you just got to make sure that you're protecting that Rhino at all costs. So the Rhino might deploy somewhere like here. And if you deploy here, depending on your opponent, if they've got massive movement and they can get all the way over into this, then they're going to be able to shoot you. But chances are they probably don't have that much movement, so they're not going to be able to shoot you there. If they come through the middle here, they're not going to be able to shoot you. If they come up this side, they're not going to shoot you. So that's a pretty good place for your Rhino. Then you're also going to have 10 Terminators on the board. Now these guys, again, you want to deploy them as close as possible, but you want to make sure that they're out of line of sight. So I would probably deploy 10 Terminators over here. And then generally what you're going to want to do with this army, if you've got the two big units of Terminators, is you're basically going to want to send one towards one of those no man's land objectives, which will be here in the middle and over here. And then the other one's going to want to rapid ingress and charge onto that. So the way you're going to want to probably do that is have one unit here and then the other unit in Deep Strike. Then you've got all your Warp Talons are in Deep Strike. You've got a unit of Raptors, which is this unit here. And I would deploy these guys down here in this ruin here. And the idea there is they're out of line of sight, they can't be shot. You might even deploy them in a single file line behind it, but they're maximally positioned to move out towards the objective that's going to be here. So you want to basically, you know, in your first turn, you want to move them over to here so they're out of line of sight. Your opponent can't deal with them. And then in your second turn, if they put anything on that objective, your Raptors are going to be able to take it. And if they don't put anything on it, then your Raptors are going to be able to move in on it and get their, you know, secondaries, etc. So there's that's where you want to sort of focus your deployment, you know, and then basically if you do put one of the Warp Talons on the table, they're going to want to stay hidden as well. Remembering that they can advance and charge, so they can actually punch pretty deep. For example, if this unit up the top here, if they were Warp Talons, let's have a look at the distances that they could realistically cover. So if they're in the top ruin there, and they want to come out a decent distance, then from that position, they're going to be able to move out 12 inches plus an advance. So 12 inches gets them to here. So where's my unit of 10? 12-inch movement gets them to here. And then from there, they're going to be able to D6 their advance. Let's say they roll another, say a 5. That gets them to here. And then they're going to be able to charge. That's 17, so that becomes 29 inches is where they could end their charge move, which is all the way in here. So you're able to hit pretty deep into your opponent's deployment zone. So one of the things you generally want to do when you're deploying is deploy this unit somewhere as close to the front as it can possibly be whilst remaining safe, so that your opponent now knows that they kind of can't deploy these Marines here. Because if they do, you're going to be able to go out, hit them with your Warp Talons, kill them, and then disappear back into Deep Strike. So they're going to have to deploy everything further back like that, so that your Warp Talons aren't able to do their trick turn 1. And if they're deploying further back like that, that means that you're able to move your Raptors here and be safe, because they've hidden from you. They're not going to be able to push out onto the objectives. And then if your opponent gets the first turn, they can't interact with your Warp Talons, they can't interact with your Rhino, they can't interact with your Raptors, they can't interact with your Terminators. And as a result, they're going to have to move forward onto the objectives, and then in your first turn, you can hit them with the Warp Talons, and then disappear back into Deep Strike. So really, really effective way to use the Warp Talons there. Alrighty guys, let's put this on the leaderboard. So we've already got the Veterans of the Long War on there from our previous video. Let's have a look at where the Pactbound Zealots are going to fit when compared to those Veterans of the Long War. Pulling it in now. It's a B tier army with a 32 score, so it's going to fit just below the Veterans of the Long War, but not too far off. So they're towards the top of the list, and that's 2 factions covered on our leaderboard. We've got an A tier and a B tier. The Pactbound Zealots is a solid B tier though. It's not bad in any way. It's definitely one of those things that you could definitely take to tournaments and get serious results with it. It just lacks a little bit of the punch and a little bit of the flexibility in their stratagems that the Veterans of the Long War have. And a few of the combos the Veterans can pull off is absolutely brutal, whereas the Pactbound Zealots are a little bit more vanilla with their stratagem combos. So that's why we're putting them slightly below on the leaderboard. And yeah, with that being said, we're going to finish it up here. I hope you guys enjoyed that video. I hope you got something out of it. If you did, let me know what you thought in the comments below. And if you want to show your support for this channel, head over to blogforthebloodgod.com. You can show your support there. You can pick up some merch like this t-shirt here. We've got neoprene objective markers. We've got gaming mats. We've got dice. We've got all kinds of really cool swag that you can pick up, and it also helps me produce more content like this more frequently for you. So with that being said, we're going to leave it here. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.